Hello, and welcome back. You've joined me, Adam, for another collection of unsettling truths. Tonight we're heading deep into Appalachia once more. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps this channel reach others who, like us, are drawn to the shadows. Now let's be quiet, the woods are listening. There were 4 of us, me, Ethan, Liam, Ben, and Noah. We'd been friends since college, a bond forged in the shared boredom of lecture halls and the reckless freedom of late-night dorm life. Now, life had scattered us across different cities and careers, but we made a pact to drop everything and get away together just once a year. This year, Liam suggested camping in the forests of Shadow Creek. It was one of those countless nameless woods in the heart of Appalachia, a place that existed on maps but lived only in the hushed whispers of locals. Liam had always been drawn to places like that. He found a strange sort of poetry in their silence and isolation. Ben, the most practical one in our group, was hesitant at first. He mumbled something about the weather forecast and the lack of cell service, but in the end, he caved to the tradition of our friendship. Noah, as always, was up for anything. His life's philosophy was simple. As long as we're together, it's all good. And me? I just wanted a break from the relentless pace of life. I wanted to be back with the faces I'd spent the best days of my life with. We piled into my old Jeep on a Friday afternoon. A strange sense of peace washed over us as we left the last city traffic light behind. The roads narrowed from wide highways to winding country lanes and finally to a rugged dirt track. The tree line grew dense, the branches of ancient trees interlocking overhead to form a green tunnel that filtered the sunlight into shifting patterns on the ground. The air was thick with the wild, earthy scent of damp soil, pine needles, and decaying leaves. It was the smell of escaping civilization. After a 3-hour drive, we reached a small clearing near Shadow Creek. The spot was exactly as Liam had described it, a flat patch of grass by a babbling creek surrounded on all sides by tall, silent pines and oaks. The quiet here was different from city quiet. It wasn't empty, it was full of the rustle of the wind, the gentle murmur of the creek, and an unspoken feeling that we weren't alone, that the forest itself was a living, breathing entity watching us. We quickly set up our tents and started gathering firewood. The sun was sinking fast behind the mountains, painting the sky in deep shades of orange, pink, and purple. Ben arranged a circle of stones and we built a pyre of logs in the center. Soon a tiny spark caught and flames began to dance, licking their way up toward the darkening sky. The firelight cast a warm, golden glow on our faces. We sat around it roasting hot dogs and reminiscing about old college stories. Noah was making everyone laugh with his terrible jokes, and Liam was already planning more trips like this for the future. In that moment, around that fire, everything was perfect. All the world's worries and responsibilities were lost somewhere in the darkness beyond the circle of light. As the night deepened, so did our conversation. We talked about our lives, our dreams, our fears. That's when Liam, who always had a mysterious glint in his eye, spoke up. "All right, guys, let's tell some ghost stories." Ben rolled his eyes. "Seriously, Liam, are we 12? But Noah was instantly on board. "Yeah, why not? I'll start." Noah launched into a local folktale about a creature that lured travelers astray by mimicking the voices of their loved ones. The story was captivating, and the crackling of the fire and the immense darkness around us amplified its chilling effect. As he spoke, my eyes were fixed on the flames. They leaped and swayed erratically, rising and falling. But then, I saw something strange. For a split second in the heart of the fire, I saw a figure. It was a human shape, tall and thin, moving in perfect sync with the flames. It was dancing, its limbs twisting and flowing in an unnatural, fluid motion. I blinked, thinking it was just a trick of the eye, a play of light and shadow. When I looked again, it was gone. There was nothing but the dancing flames. "You good, Ethan?" Ben asked, looking at me. "You just went completely silent." I forced a laugh. "Nothing. Just got a little too into Noah's story." I didn't think it was worth mentioning what I'd seen. I didn't want my friends to think I was paranoid or easily spooked. It was Ben's turn next. He told an urban legend about a serial killer. As he reached the climax of his story, I glanced back at the fire. And it was there again. The same tall, slender silhouette, dancing in the core of the flames. This time, it was clearer. I couldn't make out its features, but I could distinctly see its form. It wasn't dancing with joy. It was performing a ritual, an ancient, forgotten dance. My heart began to pound in my chest. I looked over at Liam to see if he'd noticed anything, but he was completely engrossed in Ben's story. I told myself I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the fire now. The figure was still there, its dance growing faster, more fervent. After the story ended, an uneasy silence fell over us. Noah tried to lighten the mood. "Man, now I'm gonna be scared to go take a leak in the dark." He stood up, grabbed a flashlight, and headed toward the trees. "Be right back." We waited for him. A minute passed, then 2, then 5. There was no sound but the crackling of the fire. "Where the hell is Noah?" Ben asked, a nervous edge to his voice. "Maybe he got turned around," Liam said, then called out his name. "Noah! Hey, Noah!" No answer came from the deep woods, only the echo of our own voices. Now we were all starting to worry. The three of us got up, grabbed our flashlights, and started walking in the direction Noah had gone. We kept calling his name, our voices swallowed by the night's silence. We found his flashlight lying on the ground, its beam cutting a lonely path through the darkness. But there was no sign of Noah. We searched the area, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air. In a state of rising panic, we ran back to our camp. The fire was still burning, but its warmth no longer felt comforting. It felt menacing. We tried to call the police, but as we already knew, there was no signal. "We have to wait for morning," Liam said, his voice trembling. "As soon as it's light, we get out of here and find help." The three of us sat around the fire again, this time in silence, each lost in his own fear. I gathered the courage to look into the flames. My blood ran cold. There were two figures dancing in the fire now. They were identical, tall and thin, moving in perfect, eerie unison. Their dance seemed more aggressive, as if they were celebrating a victory. "Liam, Ben," I whispered, "look at the fire." They looked hesitantly. I saw the same wave of horror wash over their faces that I was feeling. What is that?" Ben stammered. "I don't know," Liam replied, his eyes wide with terror. "But I think it has something to do with Noah." None of us slept that night. We huddled together, clutching our flashlights, and watched the fire where two silhouettes danced relentlessly. We jumped at every sound, saw Noah's face in every shadow. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, we started packing our things in a frenzy. We left Noah's tent and his gear behind, hoping we'd be back for it soon. We just had to get out of that place. As we were ready to leave, Ben said, "I need to fill up my water bottle from the creek." He walked toward the creek, which was just a few yards from the camp. Liam and I waited for him by the jeep. A few minutes passed, but he didn't come back. "Now, where is he?" I said, my voice tight with panic. "Ben!" Liam screamed. No reply. We sprinted to the creek. His water bottle was on the bank, but Ben was gone. We searched up and down the creek, but there was no trace of him. He had vanished too. Now there were only two of us. The fear was suffocating. We looked at each other, the same unspoken question in our eyes. Who's next? We ran back toward the fire. It had burned down to glowing embers, but even in their faint light, we could see it clearly. There were 3 figures now. They were dancing in a circle, their movements more complex and ritualistic. "We have to get out of here now," Liam yelled. We abandoned the rest of our gear and scrambled for the Jeep. We jumped inside and Liam fumbled with the key, his hands shaking. The engine coughed once, twice, and finally roared to life. Liam threw the Jeep into reverse and tore down the dirt track. As we sped away from that cursed place, I took one last look back. Smoke was rising from the embers of the fire, and within that smoke I could still see the 3 figures dancing. But now a 4th figure was joining them, just beginning to take its place, its dance a little, hesitant as if it were still learning the steps. We reported the incident. The police conducted a search for days, but they never found any trace of Noah or Ben. All they found was our campsite, with 3 tents and a dead fire. To them, it was just another case of 2 young men getting lost in the woods, but I know they weren't lost, they were taken. The fire took them. Even now, whenever I sit near a fire at night, I'm afraid to look into the flames. I'm terrified I'll see those dancing figures again, and my greatest fear is that one day I might see a 5th one in there making room for me. My name is Jacob, and I'm a farmer. Not a big landowner, just a simple man with a few acres of land nestled in the foothills of Appalachia, passed down to me from my father and his father before him. This land is my life, my livelihood, and my identity. I know every corner of it, every rise and every dip. Or at least I thought I did. Last summer, a severe drought hit our region. Not a drop of rain had fallen in months. The creeks had run dry, and my old well, which had supplied my family with water for generations, was now spitting up nothing but mud. My cornfields were thirsty, their leaves turning yellow and wilting. I knew if I didn't do something, my entire crop would be lost and I would lose everything I had. After much deliberation, I made a decision. I would dig a new well at the northern edge of my property, a spot where the ground always seemed to stay a little damp. It was a difficult and exhausting task, but I had no other choice. I gathered my tools, a shovel, a pickaxe, and an old bucket, and got to work. The first few days were brutal. The sun beat down relentlessly, and the earth was as hard as rock. Sweat dripped into my eyes and my hands were raw with blisters. I dug from dawn till dusk, slowly, inch by inch, descending into the depths of the earth. On the 5th day, when I was about 10 feet down, the tip of my shovel struck something hard. A dull thud echoed in the hole. I figured it was a large rock, a common obstacle in these hilly parts. I began to carefully dig away the dirt around it. But it wasn't a rock. It was wood, dark black wood in surprisingly good condition. As I cleared more soil, a structure began to emerge. It was a square frame, made of thick, rough-hewn beams. It looked like the foundation of an old building, but this deep underground? It made no sense. Driven by curiosity, I kept digging. Soon I uncovered an opening in the center of the frame. It was the mouth of a tunnel leading straight down into the darkness of the earth. The walls of the tunnel were also lined with that same black wood, and carved into them were strange, unfamiliar symbols like the script of some forgotten language. A strange smell wafted up from the tunnel. It wasn't the scent of freshly dug earth, but something else. It was a mix of damp, stale soil, rotting roots, and something I couldn't quite identify. A sweet, sickening decay. I shone my flashlight down the shaft, but the beam couldn't penetrate more than a few feet, as if the darkness itself was swallowing the light. The discovery unsettled me. My grandfather always used to say that some places are best left undisturbed. I thought about covering the tunnel back up with dirt and finding another spot for the well. But then I thought of my dying fields. I had already put in so much work and I didn't have time to start over. I convinced myself it was probably just an old, forgotten cellar and nothing to be afraid of. I laid a few thick wooden planks over the opening so I wouldn't accidentally fall in and decided to continue digging around it. That night, as I lay exhausted in my small farmhouse, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the image of the tunnel and its strange, cloying smell. Around midnight, I heard a sound. It was a low, persistent noise coming from beneath my house. It was the sound of nails scratching against wood or dirt. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I sat up, my heart pounding. I thought it might be a raccoon or some other animal that had gotten into the walls. I tried to ignore the sound, but it continued, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but always constant. It sounded like something was trying to claw its way out from under the ground. The next morning, I convinced myself it was all a product of my exhaustion. I went back to the well and started working. But all day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned my back, I felt like someone was standing right behind me. I would whip around, but there was nothing there but me and my wilting fields. As evening approached, I finished my work and headed back to the house. As I walked past my cornfields, I saw something that made my soul freeze. Between the rows of corn, there was a small mound of disturbed earth, and from the center of that mound, a thin, pale hand was sticking out, its fingers curled as if reaching for help. I froze in terror. I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought it must be a dried branch or the root of a plant. I mustered the courage to get closer and look. It was a hand, caked in dirt, but unmistakably a human hand. Its skin was as thin as paper and its nails were long and black. I screamed and ran, bolting into my house and locking the door behind me. I grabbed my old hunting rifle, loaded it, and kept it by my side. That night, I stayed awake, listening for every sound. The scratching started again, but this time it wasn't just coming from under my house. It was coming from everywhere, from the fields, from the garden, from the yard. It sounded like hundreds of small creatures were digging tunnels beneath the ground, slowly moving toward me. I peeked out the window. In the moonlight, my fields looked like a nightmare. Every few feet, a new hand was emerging from the soil. Some hands were small, like a child's. Others were large and gnarled. They swayed gently in the air as if they were feeling for something, or perhaps beckoning. I gripped my rifle, trying to fight down the panic. I told myself it was a dream, a horrible nightmare from which I would soon wake, but the scratching sounds grew louder, and now they had reached the foundation of my house. I could feel a faint vibration in the floor beneath my feet. Suddenly, the floorboards in my kitchen creaked. One of the boards lifted, and the same damp, putrid smell filled the air. Then from the gap, a thin, pale arm emerged, its fingers trying to grip the edge of the floor. That was it. That was my breaking point. I aimed the rifle at the arm and fired. A deafening blast echoed through the house, and the arm recoiled with a jolt. But a moment later, two more hands emerged from the same spot. I stopped thinking. I ran for the back door, threw it open, and sprinted out into the darkness. I was running through my fields, and all around my feet, hands emerging from the earth were trying to grab me. I stumbled over them, trampled them, and kept running. I could hear the sounds of earth breaking and hundreds of bodies pulling themselves out of the ground behind me. I ran without looking back, ran until my lungs burned. I didn't stop until I reached the main road and collapsed in the headlights of a passing car. The driver was a kind old man. He helped me up, gave me some water, and took me to the sheriff's office in the nearest town. I tried to tell the sheriff everything: the well, the tunnel, the scratching sounds, the hands. He listened, a look of pity and disbelief on his face. He sent 2 deputies back to my farm with me. When we arrived, the sun was rising. The farm was perfectly calm and quiet. My fields were just as they were, dry and withered, But there were no hands, no mounds of dirt, no disturbances. Even the well I had been digging was gone. In its place was just flat, hard, packed earth, as if I had never dug there at all. My kitchen floor was perfectly intact. The sheriff and his deputies looked at each other. They probably thought the heat and isolation had made me lose my mind. They advised me to stay with a relative in town for a few days. I never went back to that farm. I sold the land for whatever I could get for it. I live in a small apartment in the city now with several floors of concrete beneath my feet. But even today, sometimes in the dead of night, I hear it. A faint, distant scratching sound. And I know they are still there under the ground, waiting in their tunnels. They haven't just gone to sleep. They are spreading slowly, inch by inch, waiting for the day they can surface again. And I have this terrifying feeling that they aren't just under my old land, but everywhere, right beneath our feet, just waiting for us to notice. My grandfather's house wasn't a place you'd find on a map. It was tucked away in a deep fold of the Appalachian Mountains in eastern Kentucky, a place the locals called Blackwood Hollow. The name was fitting. The woods there were so old and dense they seemed to swallow the sunlight before it could ever touch the ground. I hadn't been back in almost 20 years, not since my grandmother passed, and my grandfather, a man as stubborn and silent as the mountains themselves, retreated into his own world. But now he was gone too. As the last living relative, the grim duty of cleaning out the old house fell to me. I drove for hours, leaving the paved highways behind for winding dirt roads that were little more than scars on the mountainside. My phone lost signal an hour before I even reached the turnoff for the hollow. A sense of isolation, thick and heavy as the humid summer air, settled over me. The house looked smaller and more tired than I remembered, leaning slightly as if the weight of the years was finally pushing it back into the earth. The paint was peeling and wild vines were creeping up the porch columns like skeletal fingers. But what caught my eye, standing in the overgrown yard like a forgotten relic, was the old swing set. It was made of heavy, dark wood, not the cheap metal kind you see today. Two simple swings hung from the crossbeam, their ropes frayed, their wooden seats weathered to a silvery gray. My grandfather built that swing set for me and my sister, Sarah, with his own two hands. We spent countless summer afternoons on it, our laughter echoing through the hollow as we tried to swing high enough to touch the leaves of the old oak tree. But Sarah was gone. A fever took her when she was just 7. After that, the laughter stopped. The swings hung still. My grandfather never spoke of her again, but sometimes I'd catch him staring at the empty swings, his face a mask of stone. He had a strange rule about them. "Never let the swings be still for too long, Daniel," he'd say, his voice a low rumble. "An empty seat is an invitation. The woods like to fill what's empty." I was just a kid. I thought it was just one of his cryptic mountain sayings. I never understood what he meant. I spent the first day hauling out boxes of my grandmother's things, moth-eaten quilts, stacks of old magazines, jars of preserves that had long since turned dark. The house was filled with the ghosts of memories, and by nightfall I was emotionally and physically exhausted. I made a simple dinner and sat on the porch watching the fireflies begin their silent, blinking dance in the yard. The night was unnervingly quiet. No traffic, no sirens, just the chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. My gaze drifted to the swing set, standing like a dark skeleton in the moonlight. And then I saw it. One of the swings was moving. It was a gentle, rhythmic motion back and forth, as if someone was pushing it lightly. I squinted, my heart giving a little thump. It had to be the wind, but there was no wind. The leaves on the trees were perfectly still. The air was heavy and motionless. I stood up, a cold knot forming in my stomach. The swing continued its steady, silent arc. It was the one I used to sit on. I told myself it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me, or maybe some oddity of gravity on the uneven ground. I went inside, locked the door, and tried to put it out of my mind. That night I was jolted awake by a sound. It was faint but unmistakable. The rhythmic creak, creak, creak of the old swing set. It was faster now, more energetic. I lay in bed, my body rigid, listening to that sound slice through the silence of the house. It went on for what felt like an hour before finally fading away. The next morning, in the bright, unforgiving light of day, the swing set was perfectly still. I walked out to it, my boots sinking into the damp grass. The wood was cool and damp to the touch. There were no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. I felt foolish. It was an old house, full of old sounds. I was just letting my imagination get the better of me. I worked all day trying to stay busy, trying to ignore the gnawing unease in the back of my mind. But as the sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the yard, the feeling of being watched returned. I kept glancing out the window at the swing set, half expecting to see it moving again. When darkness fell, I didn't sit on the porch. I stayed inside with the doors locked and a single lamp burning. I tried to read, but the words just swam on the page. My ears were strained, listening for that sound. Around midnight, it started. Creak, creak, creak. This time I had to see. I crept to the window and peered out. The moon was bright, bathing the yard in a pale, ghostly light. Both swings were moving now, flying high into the air with an impossible energy, as if two invisible children were having the time of their lives. And then I heard it. Laughter. It was the clear, joyful sound of a child's giggle carried on the night air. It was a sound that should have been happy, but out here in this place it was the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. My breath caught in my throat. The laughter echoed, seeming to come from the swings themselves. Some insane, desperate part of me thought of Sarah. Could it be her? A spirit of a child, returned to her favorite place to play. The thought was both comforting and horrifying. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door and stepped out onto the porch. "Sarah?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The swings kept moving and the laughter continued. I took a step off the porch, then another, drawn forward by a force I couldn't explain. The air grew cold. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves filled my lungs. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound brave. I was about 20 feet from the swing set when the laughter began to change. The high-pitched, childish giggles started to deepen, to roughen. The joyful notes warped, stretching and twisting into something guttural and ancient. The sound grated on my ears, scraping at the edges of my sanity. Within seconds, the innocent laughter had transformed completely into a low, raspy cackle. It was a dry, rattling sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement or bones grinding together. It was the laughter of something that had never been young, something that had never known joy. I froze, my blood turning to ice. This was not the spirit of a child. This was something else, something old and malevolent. The swings began to slow, the cackling fading with them. As they came to a stop, the world fell into a dead, profound silence. The crickets had stopped chirping. The owls had gone quiet. It felt as if the entire forest was holding its breath. I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the two empty, motionless swings. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get back inside, to get in my car and drive away and never look back. But my feet were rooted to the spot. Then, from the darkness of the woods behind the swing set, a voice spoke. It was a whisper, but it carried with an unnatural clarity. "An empty seat is an invitation." It was my grandfather's words, but it wasn't his voice. This voice was thin and reedy, like the wind whistling through a crack in a door. It was the voice that belonged to the cackle, Slowly, a figure began to emerge from the shadows behind the oak tree. It was tall and impossibly thin, its limbs long and jointed like a spider's. It didn't walk. It unfolded itself from the darkness, its movements jerky and wrong. It was wrapped in what looked like strips of peeling bark and damp moss, making it seem like a part of the forest itself. I couldn't see a face, only a dark, hollow space where a face should be. It glided toward the swing set, its feet making no sound on the grass. It raised one long twig-like arm and pointed a finger at the empty swing, the one that had started moving first. My swing. "You left it empty," the voice whispered again, this time seeming to come from right beside my ear. That broke the spell. A primal scream tore from my throat. I turned and bolted, scrambling for the house. I didn't dare look back. I slammed the door, fumbled with the lock, and threw my entire body against it, as if I could hold back the ancient darkness of the woods by sheer force. I could hear the cackling again right outside the door, a sound of pure, hateful amusement. Then came a soft, deliberate scratching on the wood. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I backed away from the door, my heart feeling like it was going to explode. I ran through the house, grabbing my car keys and my wallet, not thinking, just moving. I fled out the back door, crashing through the overgrown bushes and sprinting for my car. The cackling followed me, echoing through the hollow, seeming to come from every direction at once. I jumped into the car, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice before getting them into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse, not caring about the lawn or the flower beds, and sped down the dirt track. In my rearview mirror, I saw it. The figure was standing by the swing set, and the swings were moving again. They were flying higher and higher, faster and faster, celebrating their victory. I drove all night, fueled by terror. I didn't stop until the sun was up and I was hundreds of miles away, in a brightly lit gas station surrounded by the comforting, normal sounds of civilization. I never went back. I hired a company to clear out the house and sell the property. I told them to tear down the swing set and burn it. I don't know if they did. I don't want to know. Sometimes on quiet nights when the wind is blowing just right, I think I can hear it. A faint, distant creak, 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 and I remember my grandfather's words. The woods like to fill what's empty. I had left my childhood behind, left those swings empty for 20 years, and the woods had accepted the invitation. My name is Frank, and I've been a long-haul trucker for 22 years. I've driven through every corner of this country, seen every kind of weather God or Mother Nature could throw at a man. I've navigated blizzards in the Rockies, dust storms in the Mojave, and hurricanes on the Gulf Coast. I thought I was immune to the fear that darkness and isolation can bring. I was wrong. It happened last fall on a run through the winding, forgotten highways of Appalachia in West Virginia. The route was a shortcut, a tangled ribbon of asphalt that snaked through dense forests and shadowed hollows. It was meant to save me 6 hours. Instead, it cost me a part of my soul. The day had started clear, but by late afternoon, the sky had turned a bruised, angry purple. The clouds gathered over the mountains like a dark army, and the wind began to howl through the trees, making them sway and groan like old men in pain. Then the rain started. It wasn't a gentle shower, it was a biblical deluge, a solid wall of water that hammered against my windshield and turned the road into a slick black mirror. My wipers, even at their highest speed, were fighting a losing battle. I was crawling along at 20 miles an hour, my knuckles white on the steering wheel when it happened. I took a sharp curve and the road, already slick with rain and fallen leaves, gave way. My rig's back wheels slid off the crumbling asphalt and into the soft, muddy shoulder. I felt a sickening lurch as the massive weight of the trailer pulled the whole truck sideways. The engine screamed, the tires spun uselessly, and then, with a final shuddering groan, my 18-wheeler settled into the mud, tilted at a dangerous angle. I was stuck, royally and completely stuck. I tried everything, rocking the truck, shifting gears, cursing at the dashboard, but it was no use. The mud had me, and it wasn't letting go. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. Out here, the mountains swallowed radio waves like a hungry beast. I was alone miles from the nearest town, in the middle of a raging storm. For an hour, I just sat there in my cab. The rhythmic drumming of the rain on the roof, my only company. The darkness outside was absolute, broken only by the brief, blinding flashes of lightning that illuminated a world of thrashing trees and running water. Panic, a cold and unfamiliar feeling, began to creep into the edges of my mind. Then, in another flash of lightning, I saw it. A light. Faint and flickering about a quarter-mile up the road, nestled deep in the trees. It was a single warm yellow light, a window, a house. Hope surged through me, sharp and desperate. I made a decision. Staying in the truck all night felt like being a sitting duck. I grabbed my heaviest maglite, pulled on my rain jacket, and stepped out into the storm. The wind and rain hit me with physical force, stealing my breath. The ground was a treacherous soup of mud and water. Every step was a struggle, but I kept my eyes fixed on that distant, welcoming light. The walk felt like an eternity. The woods were alive with the sounds of the storm, the crash of thunder, the roar of the wind, the snapping of branches. But underneath it all, there was another sound, a wet, squelching noise like heavy feet plodding through deep mud. I told myself it was just an animal, or maybe my own footsteps echoing in the chaos. Finally, I stumbled out of the trees and onto a gravel path that led to a small old farmhouse. It was a simple 2-story wooden house with a sagging porch and a single light burning in a downstairs window. It looked weathered and tired, like it had endured 100 years of these mountain storms. I climbed the creaking porch steps, my heart pounding with a mix of relief and apprehension, and knocked on the heavy wooden door. For a long moment, there was no answer. I was about to knock again when I heard the sound of a bolt being drawn, and the door opened a few inches. An old man peered out at me. He was thin and wiry, with a face as wrinkled as a dried apple and pale, watery eyes that seemed to look right through me. He held a kerosene lamp in one hand, its flickering light casting long, dancing shadows on the wall behind him. My truck. It stuck down the road, I stammered, shouting over the storm. Phone's got no signal. I was hoping I could maybe wait out the storm here, or use your phone if you have one. The old man stared at me, his expression unreadable. He didn't seem surprised or scared to see a stranger at his door in the middle of the night. He just looked resigned. No phone line out here, he said, his voice a dry, raspy whisper. Hasn't been for years. He hesitated, then opened the door wider. But you can't stay out there. Not on a night like this. Come in. I stepped inside, dripping water onto the worn wooden floor. The house was sparse and clean. It smelled of old wood smoke, and something else. Damp earth. The old man bolted the door behind me, the sound echoing in the quiet house. Name's Silas, he said, not offering a hand. Frank, I replied, I really appreciate this. You have no idea. Silas just nodded and led me into a small living room. A fire was crackling in a stone fireplace, casting a warm, inviting glow. I gratefully sank into an old armchair near the hearth, feeling the warmth seep into my chilled bones. Silas sat in a rocking chair opposite me, the kerosene lamp on a small table between us. We sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the relentless drumming of the rain against the windows. The silence felt heavy, expectant, I tried to make small talk, asking him how long he'd lived here, but his answers were short and clipped. He'd lived here his whole life, he said, never left. Nasty storm, I said, trying again. Silas stopped rocking. He stared into the fire, his eyes distant. It's not the storm you need to worry about, he whispered. It's the rain. I must have looked confused because he turned his pale eyes on me. The rain, it brings something with it. Something old. Something that belongs to the mud and the dark. He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. It walks on nights like this. It's looking for a way in. A shiver went down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I thought he was just a crazy old man trying to spook me with local legends. I forced a nervous laugh. What, like Bigfoot or something? Silas didn't laugh. No, he said, his face grim. Something worse, something that shouldn't be. It's drawn to the light, drawn to the warmth. He glanced at the window where rain was lashing against the glass. It'll be here soon. His words and the dead seriousness in his eyes began to chip away at my skepticism. The house suddenly felt less like a shelter and more like a trap. The sounds of the storm outside took on a new, menacing quality. That's when I heard it. A soft, wet, squelching sound from outside. Slosh. 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 It was the same sound I'd heard on my walk to the house. It was slow, heavy, and deliberate. It was the sound of something massive walking through deep mud. Silas heard it too. He froze, his hand gripping the arm of his rocking chair. It's here, he breathed. The footsteps grew closer, circling the house. Slosh. Squelch. Slosh. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I stared at the window, expecting to see a face, but there was only darkness and the distorted patterns of running water. Then the footsteps stopped, right outside the front door. For a moment there was absolute silence, save for the storm. Then came a sound that made my blood turn to ice, a soft, wet thump against the door. And another. Thump. 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 It wasn't a knock. It was the sound of a heavy, sodden body leaning against the wood. I looked at Silas. His face was pale as death, his eyes fixed on the door. He raised a trembling finger to his lips, signaling for me to be quiet. A low, gurgling sound came from the other side of the door, like someone trying to speak through a throat full of water and mud. It was a sound of immense, ancient sorrow. Then a new sound started. A slow scraping noise against the side of the house. It moved along the wall toward the living room window. My gaze was locked on the window pane. Rain streamed down the glass, distorting the view. Suddenly, a shape appeared at the window. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form indistinct and wavering behind the curtain of rain. It was a silhouette of a man, but stretched and elongated, its limbs too long, its proportions all wrong. It had no discernible features, just a dark, towering presence. It raised a long, thin arm and pressed a hand against the glass. The hand was huge, webbed with mud and riverweed. The glass creaked under the pressure. I could see the pane of glass bowing inward. I scrambled back from my chair, knocking it over with a crash. The figure at the window recoiled at the sound, melting back into the darkness. "Don't make a sound!" Silas hissed, his eyes wide with terror. "It hates sudden noises." We stayed frozen, listening. The scraping started again, moving around the house, testing the walls, the windows. It was looking for a weak spot. It was looking for a way in. Hours passed like this. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind sent a fresh wave of terror through me. Silas and I didn't speak. We just sat there in the flickering firelight, two strangers united by a primal fear. The storm began to subside, the rain lessening to a steady drizzle. The scraping sounds grew less frequent, more distant. Finally, as the first hint of gray dawn appeared in the sky, the sounds stopped altogether. We waited until the sun was fully up before we dared to move. The silence was profound. Silas slowly unbolted the front door and opened it. The porch was covered in a thick layer of mud and slick, dark leaves. And in the mud were footprints. They were huge, vaguely man-shaped, but longer and deeper than any human foot could make. They led from the woods, circled the house, and then went back into the trees. I didn't say another word. I just nodded at Silas, a silent thank you that he understood completely. I walked back to my truck, my legs shaking. The sun was out, the birds were singing, and the world looked normal again. But I knew it wasn't. A local farmer with a tractor helped me pull my rig out of the mud a few hours later. I didn't tell him what happened. He wouldn't have believed me. I finished my delivery and drove straight home. I called my dispatcher and told them I was quitting. I couldn't do it anymore. I can't stand the darkness, the isolation, the long, lonely roads. And the rain. I can't stand the rain. Every time it storms, I lock my doors, draw my curtains, and turn up the TV to drown out the sound. Because sometimes, even now, in the quiet moments when the rain is drumming against my window, I think I can hear it. A soft, wet, squelching sound, like something heavy walking through the mud looking for a way in. My name is Alex, and I'm afraid of the dark. It's not a casual dislike. It's a deep primal fear that has clung to me since childhood. For me, darkness isn't just the absence of light. It's a living, breathing thing, a presence where things hide, where the edges of reality blur and fray. My friends used to give me a hard time about it, especially Mark. "You're 30 years old, Alex," he'd say with a grin. "Time to let go of the boogeyman." Maybe that's why I said yes when Mark planned a weekend camping trip deep in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. It was a misguided attempt to prove something, to my friends, and maybe to myself, that I could conquer this fear. There were 4 of us in the group. Me, Mark, the self-appointed leader, his girlfriend Maya, who was the level-headed one, and Sam, our perpetually cheerful, easygoing friend. The trip started perfectly. We left the city behind, the roads growing narrower and more winding as we climbed into the mountains. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and damp earth. When we reached our campsite, a secluded clearing beside a small, rushing creek, the sun was still high in the sky. We set up our tents with laughter and easy conversation. In the daylight, the forest felt beautiful, peaceful. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, this trip wouldn't be so bad. As evening fell, we built a fire. The flames leaped toward the sky, their warm orange light carving out a small sanctuary of safety from the encroaching darkness. We gathered around it, eating and trading stories. The firelight danced on our faces, and behind us, our shadows stretched long and flickering against the trees. I've always had a strange fascination with shadows. There are silent, two-dimensional twins born of light and erased by darkness. As we sat around the fire, I found myself unconsciously watching ours. Mark's shadow, cast against a large boulder behind him, looked as solid and confident as he was. Maya's was soft and calm, and Sam's danced erratically with his every movement and burst of laughter. Then I looked at my own shadow. It was wrong. It stretched out on the ground behind me, but it didn't look right. It was long, unnaturally so, and its features were distorted. Its arms seemed thin and spindly, and its head was a strange, elongated oval. I waved my hand and the shadow mimicked the movement, but there was a slight, almost imperceptible delay, as if it were hesitating. "Everything okay, Alex?" Maya asked, her voice laced with concern. "You're staring at your shadow like you've seen a ghost." I quickly looked away, forcing a laugh. "Nothing, just the firelight making it look weird." But I knew it wasn't just the firelight. Something was fundamentally wrong. I spent the rest of the evening trying my best not to look at it, but I could feel its presence behind me like a stranger sitting at my back. The night grew deeper, and the sounds of the forest changed. The gentle chirping of crickets was now punctuated by the snap of distant twigs and a rustle in the undergrowth that sounded too much like whispers. Mark threw another log on the fire and the flames roared to life. I dared to look at my shadow again. It had gotten worse. It wasn't just elongated anymore, it seemed darker, more solid, as if it were gaining substance. Its shape was no longer a distorted version of mine. It looked like something hunched and ancient with stooped shoulders. A cold dread spread through my veins. I decided to stand up, to walk around, maybe clear my head. "Just stretching my legs for a minute," I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. I stood up. But my shadow didn't. It remained on the ground, a dark stain where I had been sitting a moment before. For a second I stood frozen, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. It was impossible. My shadow had detached from me. Mark, Maya, and Sam were laughing at some joke I'd missed. They hadn't noticed. I took a slow step backward. The shadow stayed put, unmoving. Then very slowly it stirred. Its head, which had been bowed, lifted. It turned toward me. I couldn't see its eyes. It had no face, just a black, featureless void. But I could feel its gaze. There was a cold, calculating intelligence in its stare. I forgot how to breathe. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. "Alex, you all right, man? You look like you've seen a ghost," Sam said, finally noticing my state. I couldn't answer. My eyes were locked on the thing that used to be my shadow. It began to get to its feet. It didn't rise like a person, it unfolded like a broken marionette, its limbs bending at wrong angles. When it was fully upright, it stood at least 2 feet taller than me. "What? What is that?" Maya whispered, her eyes wide with horror. They all saw it now. The creature, the shadow, wasn't looking at them. It was looking only at me. It took a step forward, peeling itself off the ground, and was now a freestanding, 3-dimensional being. Its body was made of pure darkness, a darkness so profound it seemed to absorb the firelight. Mark, ever the brave one, grabbed a heavy branch. "Get back!" he yelled. The shadow ignored him. It took another step toward me, its movement silent and fluid. It raised one of its long black arms, reaching for me. In that instant, my body finally reacted. I turned and ran. I heard my friend screaming behind me, but I didn't stop. I plunged into the blackness of the forest, branches whipping at my face and arms, my feet stumbling over roots and rocks. I heard no sound of pursuit, but I could feel its presence. It was behind me, silently pacing me like a predator waiting for its prey to tire. My terror propelled me forward. I don't know how long I ran. Time and distance became meaningless. Eventually, I stumbled out onto a dirt road and collapsed. My lungs were on fire and my entire body ached. I looked back. The forest was silent and dark. There was nothing there. I walked along that road until the first light of dawn streaked the sky. Hours later, a park ranger found me. I tried to tell him everything about the campsite, the fire, the shadow. He looked at me like I was crazy. He took me back to the campsite. When we arrived, the scene froze my blood. The tents were shredded, the gear scattered as if a hurricane had torn through the clearing. The fire was dead, nothing but a pile of cold ash. And my friends, Mark, Maya, and Sam, they were gone. The rangers searched for days. They found nothing, no tracks, no clues. They had vanished as if they had never existed. The official report concluded we were probably attacked by a bear and that I was suffering from trauma-induced psychosis. They never believed me. I never went camping again. I'm still afraid of the dark, more so now than ever. I keep every light in my apartment on. I never go out alone after the sun sets, because I know that creature is still out there. It's waiting for me. And the most terrifying part is that sometimes when I catch a glimpse of my own reflection in a dark window, I think my shadow looks a little taller, a little more distorted. And I have this horrifying feeling that I didn't come back from the woods alone that night. My shadow didn't detach from me, it just changed places. It no longer follows me on the ground, it dwells inside me now. My name is Cal. I've been a park ranger for 6 years. It's not a job, it's a calling. I grew up in these mountains, learned to walk on their trails, and learned to listen to the silence of their forests. I always thought I knew this place better than any other living soul. I thought the woods held no secrets from me. I was so wrong. It was late August, the kind of deep summer heat where the air gets so heavy it feels like a chore to breathe. I was on patrol in a remote section of the park near a ridge the old-timers call Lost Man's Peak, an area so rugged that hikers rarely ventured there. My job was to check on old trail markers and survey the wildlife population. It was a routine day, or so I thought. I made a mistake, a rookie mistake. I hadn't checked my water supply that morning. By midday, with the sun directly overhead and my uniform soaked with sweat, I reached for my canteen and felt that it was dangerously light. Only a few sips left. The nearest known creek was at least 5 miles away, and a hike that long in this heat without water could be deadly. A low-grade panic started to set in. I cursed myself for my carelessness. Me, a seasoned ranger, making such a basic error. I decided to rest in the shade of a large oak tree to conserve my energy and figure out my next move. As I sat there, running my dry tongue over my lips, I heard a sound. It was very faint, a gentle, melodic sound, the sound of bubbling water. It seemed impossible. According to every map of this area, there wasn't a water source for miles. I moved toward the sound, pushing through thickets of rhododendron and tangled vines until I came to a small, hidden ravine. And there it was. Nestled in a cluster of moss-covered stones was a small spring, bubbling clear, cold water up from the earth. The water was so transparent I could see every pebble and grain of sand at the bottom. For a moment I hesitated. An unmarked spring. It went against a cardinal rule. Never drink from an unknown water source in the wild. But thirst is a powerful motivator. It overrides reason. I looked at the water, at its cool, clear invitation, and my resolve broke. I knelt and cupped my hands, scooping up the water. It was ice cold. I took a long drink. It tasted better than any water I'd ever had, sweet, earthy, and incredibly refreshing. I drank more, splashed it on my face, and filled my canteen to the brim. As I took the last sip, a strange sensation washed over me. The world seemed to spin for a second, and the colors around me became brighter, more intense. The sounds became sharper. I dismissed it as the effects of dehydration and relief. I capped my canteen and started to head back toward the trail. That's when I noticed it for the first time. The bark of the oak tree I'd been resting under, its deep grooves were no longer just grooves. They were forming a face, an old wrinkled face with its eyes closed as if it were sleeping. I blinked, but the face was still there. I looked at the other trees. They all had faces, some young, some old, some smiling, some in pain. They had always been there, but I had never seen them. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I thought I might be hallucinating from the heat. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The faces were still there, silent and watchful. I started walking away quickly, trying to keep my heart rate under control. I glanced at the boulders scattered around me. They were no longer just inanimate rocks. I could hear a low, deep rumbling coming from within them, as if they were whispering to each other. It was a language I couldn't understand, but I could feel the weight of it, the antiquity. I was scared now. Something was wrong with the water I'd drunk. It had done something to my mind. I picked up my pace, almost breaking into a run. I just wanted to get out of this part of the forest, get back to my truck, back to civilization. As I passed through a clearing, I froze. The air around me was shimmering like heat haze rising from asphalt. But it wasn't heat, it was movement. Dozens, maybe hundreds of shimmering, translucent figures were moving through the woods. They were tall and slender, their limbs waving in the air. They passed through the trees, weaving between each other in a silent, ethereal dance. They looked like ghosts, but they had a tangible presence, an energy I could feel in the air. I ducked behind a large rock, my breath caught in my throat. What was I seeing? Were these spirits, guardians of the forest, or something else entirely? I hid there for what felt like hours, watching these luminous beings as they performed their silent ballet. None of them paid me any mind. It was as if I were invisible to them. As the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and purple, the figures began to fade. They vanished one by one, as if dissolving into the twilight. When the last one was gone, the forest was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet now. It was a heavy, ancient silence, pregnant with the secrets I had just witnessed. I spent the rest of the night awake behind that rock. I thought about the spring. The water hadn't made me hallucinate. It had heightened my senses, peeled back a veil from my eyes. It had given me the ability to see the world as it truly is, a place teeming with life, not just the life we normally see, but an older, deeper, more fundamental life. The faces in the trees, the whispers in the stones, the dancing figures, they had always been here. I was the one who had been blind. With the first light of dawn, I cautiously resumed my journey. I was no longer afraid, but filled with a profound sense of awe and reverence. I was no longer a stranger passing through the woods. I was a guest in a world I was only just beginning to understand. I went back to the spring. I had to see it again, to try to understand what it was. When I reached the hidden ravine, the spring was there. The water was still bubbling up from the earth, clear and inviting. I sat on its edge and looked at my reflection in the water. But it wasn't just my reflection. Behind me in the water, I could see the shimmering figures still dancing. That's when I understood the water doesn't show you what isn't there. It shows you what is there. I was so engrossed I didn't notice it at first. One of the figures had stopped dancing. It had turned. It was looking directly at me through my reflection in the water. It had no eyes, but I could feel its gaze on me like a physical touch. It was a cold, analytical gaze, holding neither malice nor kindness, just an ancient, indifferent curiosity. And then the other figures began to stop. They turned one by one, all of them staring at me. All the whispers in the forest ceased. The eyes of the faces in the trees which had been closed were now open. The entire forest, the entire ancient world that had been hidden from me just a moment before, was now looking at me. They had noticed me. A terror unlike anything I had ever felt washed over me. It wasn't the fear of dying. It was something far deeper. It was the fear of losing my place, the fear of being seen in a world where you don't belong. I got up and ran. I didn't look back. I ran, the air burning in my lungs, the whispers of the stones now sounding like screams at my heels. I could feel the faces in the trees turning to follow me, their eyes tracking my every move. I made it out of the forest that day, but a part of it came back with me. I'm still a park ranger, but I don't see the woods the same way anymore. I don't just see trees and rocks. I see faces and spirits. I hear their whispers and I feel their presence. I never went back to the unmarked spring, but I know it's still there. And I know those ancient things are still there in their silent dance, in their eternal whispers. And they're still watching. They're waiting for me. Because on that day when I drank from their water, I didn't just see their world, I became a part of it, and they want their part back. My name is Elias Thorne, I'm not a sport fisherman. I don't have the fancy gear or the high-tech fish finders. I'm what my grandfather called a riverman. For 3 generations, my family has known the hidden creeks and forgotten bends of the Nolichucky River as it carves its way through the Tennessee mountains. Fishing isn't a hobby for me. It's a communion, a quiet conversation with the water and the woods. I've spent more hours of my life with my feet planted in a cold river than on solid ground. I thought I knew its every secret, every mood. I thought the river was a part of me. I never imagined it might want to make me a part of it. It was late September when the air starts to carry the first crisp promise of autumn. The tourist season was over and the mountains had reclaimed their deep, humming silence. I decided to hike to a remote spot my grandfather had shown me years ago, a place he called the Gray Basin. It was a wide, slow-moving part of the river far from any trail, where the water ran clear over a bed of smooth, uniformly gray stones. The fishing there was always good, but my grandfather had been strange about it. "Don't stay past sundown, Eli," he'd warned me once, his face serious. "And for God's sake, don't ever give the river anything of yourself." I was young and dismissed it as old mountain superstition. The hike in was long, a good 2 hours of pushing through dense undergrowth and following deer trails. When I finally arrived, the place was just as I remembered it, serene and untouched. The water flowed gently over a seemingly endless carpet of smooth, palm-sized gray stones. They were all so similar in shape and color it looked as if a giant had carefully paved the riverbed. I pulled on my waders and stepped into the cool water. The current was gentle, tugging at my legs like a playful child. I found a good spot mid-river and cast my line. For a while it was perfect. The only sounds were the whisper of my line cutting through the air, the gurgle of the river, and the distant call of a hawk. After about an hour, I noticed something odd. As I shifted my feet, I felt a strange warmth through the thick rubber of my waders. It was subtle, but definite. The stones beneath my feet were warm. I frowned. The water was cold, fed by mountain springs. The riverbed should have been cold too. I reached down and scooped up one of the gray stones. It felt unnaturally warm in my hand, like a piece of coal that had been sitting near a fire. It had no sharp edges, worn smooth by centuries of flowing water. I tossed it back, a flicker of unease stirring in my gut. I told myself it was probably just some geothermal anomaly, a natural hotspot. I tried to focus on my fishing, but I couldn't shake the feeling. The warmth seemed to be spreading, a low, constant heat radiating up from the riverbed. The air itself felt heavier, charged with a strange energy. The usual river sounds seemed to fade, replaced by a low, almost subaudible hum that I felt more in my bones than heard with my ears. That's when I got clumsy. I was trying to rebait my hook, my hands slick with water. My foot slipped on a patch of unusually smooth stones. I flailed for balance, my legs scraping hard against a larger, half-submerged rock at the edge of the basin. I felt a sharp, searing pain just below my knee. I cursed, regaining my footing. I looked down. There was a deep 3-inch gash in my waders and a darker gash in the skin beneath. Blood, dark and rich, welled up from the wound. Before I could react, a single thick drop fell from my leg, hit the surface of the water, and began to dissolve in the current, a fleeting red cloud in the clear river. The change was instantaneous and absolute. The hum I had been feeling intensified, rising in pitch to a low, resonant thrum. The warmth under my feet flared into a distinct, pulsing heat, and the stones began to glow. It started with the stones directly around me. A faint, deep red light emanated from within them, as if a dying fire was being rekindled in their core. The glow spread outwards in a ripple from one stone to the next, until the entire riverbed of the Gray Basin was pulsing with a soft, malevolent crimson light. The water around me seemed to thicken, the light refracting through it in eerie, shifting patterns. I stood frozen, my line forgotten in my hand. My mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. This wasn't natural, this wasn't possible. Then I felt the pull. It started at my feet, a gentle but insistent tugging downward into the riverbed. It felt like a powerful magnet was trying to pull the nails from the soles of my boots. I tried to lift my foot, but it felt incredibly heavy, as if it were mired in setting concrete. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my disbelief. I pulled harder, straining with all my might. With a sickening schlorp, my boot came free. But the sensation wasn't just external. I felt a strange, draining weakness in my leg, the one that was bleeding. I looked down at the wound. The blood wasn't just dripping anymore, it was being drawn from the cut in a thin, steady stream, pulled downward into the water toward the glowing stones. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. Don't ever give the river anything of yourself. I had given it my blood, and now it wanted more. The pulling sensation intensified, wrapping around my ankles, my calves. It was a physical force, 100 invisible hands grabbing me, trying to drag me down. I stumbled, catching myself on my fishing rod. The stones I had dislodged with my boot didn't drift downstream. They settled back into place with an unnatural quickness, their red glow pulsing hungrily. They were alive. The stones were alive, and they were hungry. I abandoned my rod and began to fight my way toward the shore, which was only 30 feet away but felt like a mile. Every step was a battle. The water, which had been clear, was now murky with stirred-up silt, the red glow from below giving it the appearance of a river of blood. The pulling was relentless, moving up my body. I could feel it at my waist, a crushing pressure trying to fold me in half, to pull me under, to press me down onto the glowing, waiting riverbed. I could hear a sound now, a cacophony of low, grinding noises coming from the stones themselves. It was the sound of 1 billion years of hunger, the grating of ancient mineral jaws eager to feed. My legs grew heavy, my movements sluggish. The weakness from my bleeding leg was spreading through my whole body. I felt dizzy, my vision tunneling. The shore seemed to be receding with every step I took. I knew I wasn't going to make it. The river was going to take me. It was going to press me into its bed of warm, gray stones, and I would become just another smooth, silent part of the basin. In a final, desperate act, I reached into my fishing vest and pulled out my knife. I didn't know what I was going to do, fight the stones, fight the water. But my hand, acting on some primal instinct, went to the source of the problem, my wound. With a ragged cry that was half sob, half scream, I pressed the flat of the cold steel blade hard against the gash, trying to stanch the flow of blood. The pain was immense, but it was nothing compared to the terror of being pulled apart by a living river. The moment the blood stopped flowing into the water, the pulling lessened. It didn't stop, but the immediate, desperate urgency was gone. The grinding sound softened to a low, frustrated rumble. The red glow of the stones dimmed slightly. It had bought me a moment. I didn't waste it. I lunged for the shore, half swimming, half crawling through the thick, resisting water. I could still feel the hands, weaker now, but still clutching, still pulling at my clothes, my legs. I clawed at the muddy bank, my fingers digging into the soft earth. I hauled myself out of the water, collapsing onto the grass, gasping for air, my body trembling uncontrollably. I lay there for a long time, my cheek pressed against the cool, solid ground, the knife still clenched in my hand. I didn't dare look back at the river. I could still feel the faint hum of it, the deep, resentful pulse of its hunger. When I finally found the strength to stand, I didn't look back. I scrambled into the woods and ran, not caring about the trail, just putting as much distance as possible between myself and the gray basin. I ran until the sound of the river was gone, until the humming in my bones had faded, until my legs gave out and I collapsed again. I made it back to my truck just after sunset, a bloody, muddy, terrified mess. I drove away and never returned. I still fish. It's in my blood, the call of the river. But I never go to the remote places anymore. I stay in the populated areas where the river is tamed and the secrets are buried deeper. And I am meticulously, obsessively careful. I check my gear, I watch my step, and I carry a heavy-duty first aid kit. Because I know now what my grandfather meant. The mountains are old and they have a long memory. And some parts of the river are not just water and rock. They are ancient, patient predators. And all they need is a single drop to be reminded of their hunger. My name is Leo. I'm not the kind of guy who buys into local legends or ghost stories. I grew up in a small town in West Virginia, the kind of place where every old mine, every forgotten hollow, and every dilapidated shack has a story attached to it. My grandpa was the king of those stories. He'd tell me about places a man shouldn't go, places stuck in the memory of the land where time didn't run straight. I always laughed them off as old-timer superstitions. I had to learn the hard way that not every story is just a story. It was a cool afternoon in October, the sky a flat sheet of gray and the air smelling of decaying leaves. I was walking back from a friend's house and I had two choices. Take the 3-mile paved road that looped around the hills, or cut through Old Man Henderson's abandoned cornfield. The Henderson farm had been deserted for years, ever since he vanished without a trace. Folks said he just walked out into his land one day and never came back. His field was now a forgotten place where the dead corn stalks stood like skeletal sentinels. I chose the shortcut. It was only about half a mile across. 15 minutes, I figured, and I'd be home. The moment I stepped into the field, a strange quiet fell over me. The sounds of the road vanished, replaced by the crunch of dead leaves under my feet and the low whisper of the wind. The corn stalks were taller than I was, their dry brown leaves rustling against each other, making a sound like hushed, sibilant whispers. I started down the narrow, trodden path that cut through the center. I was about halfway across when I saw it. In the middle of the field, standing alone, was a single, tattered scarecrow. It was slumped on a crooked wooden cross, dressed in old, stained overalls and a faded flannel shirt. Its head was a burlap sack stuffed with straw, with two large, vacant eyes painted on with charcoal. But the thing that drew my eye, the thing that felt wrong, was its smile. It was stitched with thick black thread, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched from one side of its sackcloth face to the other. There was no joy in it, just a blank, mindless expression. I paused for a second, looking at it. There was something unsettling about it, something off. It was just a scarecrow, but it felt like it was watching me, sizing me up with its empty eyes. I shook off the feeling and kept walking. After a few more paces, an inexplicable urge made me glance back over my shoulder. The scarecrow was gone. The spot where it had stood a moment ago was empty. Only the crooked wooden cross remained stuck in the dirt. My heart did a little stutter step. How was that possible? Had I imagined it? A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. I thought maybe my friends were playing a prank on me, that they'd snuck in and moved it. "Very funny, guys," I called out, trying to force confidence into my voice. "Joke's over." There was no reply, just the whispering of the wind through the corn. Now I was genuinely scared. I decided to run. I broke into a jog, then a sprint, heading for the far side of the field. My lungs burned and the dry stalks clawed at my face and arms. I ran for what felt like 5 minutes, far too long for a field this size. I should have been out by now, but the corn stalks just kept coming, an endless rustling sea of brown. I stopped, panting, and looked around. I was lost. It was all the same in every direction. The sun had dipped lower behind the clouds and the light was beginning to fail. That's when I saw it again. To my right, about 50 feet away, stood the scarecrow. It was in a different spot now, silently watching me. And its smile. I swear it looked wider than before. A scream caught in my throat. I turned and ran in the opposite direction. I didn't look back. I just ran, my mind a frantic blur of one thought. Get out. But it didn't matter. No matter how fast I ran, I got nowhere. The field had become a labyrinth, a trap with no exit. Every time I stopped to catch my breath, the scarecrow was there in a new location, a little closer each time. And each time, its stitched grin seemed to stretch a little wider, as if it were feeding on my terror. I finally collapsed, my knees sinking into the damp earth. I looked up. It was standing right in front of me, no more than 20 feet away. I could see its smile clearly now. The threads were pulled taut, as if something inside it were trying to grin for real, trying to tear through its burlap face. I felt its empty charcoal eyes lock onto me. There was no light in them, but there was a heavy, ancient intelligence. This was not just a pile of straw and old clothes, it was alive. I started to crawl backward, my eyes never leaving it. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching, smiling. "What are you?" I whispered, my voice a ragged, trembling thing. It didn't answer. But I heard a voice. It didn't come from the scarecrow, but from all around me, as if the wind itself were speaking. It was a dry, rustling voice, like the sound of dead leaves scraping against each other. "You're lost," it whispered. I scrambled to my feet and ran in one last, desperate burst of energy. I gave up on direction, just plunged blindly through the stalks, hoping to crash through to an edge. Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet changed. I was off the mud and dead leaves and onto grass. I was out. I stumbled into a clearing and looked back. I was at the exact same edge of the field where I had started. I had been running in a massive circle, and in the center of the field, in its original spot, stood the scarecrow, slumped on its wooden cross. Its smile was still there, wide and terrible. I didn't waste a second. I got to my feet and sprinted for the paved road. I didn't look back again until I was safely inside my own front door. I never told anyone what happened. They wouldn't have believed me. They would have said I was tired or that my imagination had gotten the best of me. But I know what I saw. Years have passed. I don't live in that town anymore. But I still have nightmares about that field. In the dream, I'm always in the middle of it, lost in the corn. And the scarecrow is always there, hunting me, silently appearing and reappearing, its grin growing wider and wider until it splits its face. Sometimes when I wake up, I see a tall, dark figure standing in the corner of my room. It's only there for a second and then it's gone. And I have this terrifying feeling that maybe, just maybe, I never actually made it out of that field. Maybe I'm still there, running in that endless labyrinth, and all of this, my life, my new city, is just a dream I'm having while the scarecrow gets closer and closer, its stitched smile grinning forever, just waiting for me to wake up. My name is Sam. I've spent most of my life running from things, from responsibilities, from hard conversations, and most of all from memories. I'd built a neat, orderly little life for myself in St. Louis with a job that didn't require work boots and an apartment that had no view of the mountains. I'd convinced myself I was done for good with the small, dusty southern Missouri town where I grew up. But the thing about life is, no matter how far you run, the past has a way of catching up. Last October, my Uncle Randall passed away. He was my dad's older brother, a quiet, tough-as-nails man who was as rooted to his land as an old oak tree. His funeral was a small, quiet affair in a brick church that smelled of lemon oil and old hymnals. After the service, I stood in the parking lot with my hands in my pockets, feeling a tightness in my chest that wasn't just grief. It was something older. something I'd carried with me since I was a kid and never quite managed to shake loose. That Sunday afternoon, I packed a rucksack. Nothing fancy, just a tarp, my old sleeping bag, a couple of protein bars, and the hunting knife I'd had since I was 17. It still had my initials scratched into the handle. I filled my thermos with whatever coffee was left in the pot at the gas station and drove out to a trail I'd only ever heard people talk about after a couple of drinks. Folks called it Jasper Bend. It was a deep, wild stretch of the Ozarks where, according to the stories, a group of loggers had vanished back in the 1800s. Some said it was a rock slide. Others swore it was something they couldn't explain. You'd hear the stories if you hung around the VFW hall long enough, but nobody agreed on what actually happened. All I really knew was that nobody bothered to keep it cleared anymore, and you could hike out there for days and never run into another soul. I think more than anything, that's what I wanted, to be alone. By the time I pulled off onto the gravel shoulder, the sun was already sinking behind the ridge. There was a rusted-out gate hanging on one hinge, and a wooden sign so weathered the letters were just shallow grooves you could barely read. For a second, I thought about turning around. I could have driven back to town, slept in the guest room at my mom's, and tried to act normal. But the quiet out there felt like the only thing that might help. So I killed the engine, locked the truck, and started down the trail. It wasn't much of a trail, to be honest, just a narrow crease through the underbrush choked with brambles and old fallen branches. Every so often, the ground would dip away into sudden gullies carved by years of runoff. I slipped once, catching myself on a root that felt damp and soft. When I looked up, I could see the ridge through a mess of bare branches. It struck me right then how easy it would be to vanish out there. How a person could just step wrong and disappear and nobody would ever know exactly where they'd gone. About a mile in, I came across what must have been an old fence line. The boards were collapsed, half buried in the dirt like the earth was trying to swallow them. Just past it, there was a clearing. Probably no bigger than my kitchen, circled by stones that looked like the last scraps of a foundation. Right in the middle, a crooked sapling was growing out of a shallow pit. I don't know why, but seeing it made my mouth go dry like I'd swallowed dust. I skirted around it without stepping closer. The light was almost gone by the time the trail curved down toward the river. The water was so low it looked more like a line of wet rocks than a real stream. I found a flat spot under a bluff where the ground seemed dry enough, even if it felt a little too close to the water for comfort. My boots left dark prints in the silt, and for a second I just stood there listening. When I bent to set my pack down, that's when I saw them. Footprints. They were coming up from behind me. They were faint, almost smudged into the dirt like they'd been left when the ground was still damp. What got me was how narrow they were. Too narrow for an adult. And some were so far apart that whoever made them must have been leaping or walking in a way I couldn't picture. A knot formed in my stomach, but I told myself, maybe they're old, weeks old, maybe longer. I forced myself to keep moving. I built a small fire, sat close enough that I could feel the heat on my face, and pulled out a paperback I'd brought. I read the same page 3 times without taking in a word. That's when I heard it. A low 2-note whistle drifting down the slope. The sound was too clean, too deliberate. I held my breath, waiting. A few seconds later, it came again. The same notes, the same pause afterward, like whoever made it was listening for something. My mouth felt as dry as chalk. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded thin, like it didn't belong to me. No answer. I waited until the fire burned down to coals. The whistle didn't come back, but the silence felt worse somehow, like everything out there was holding its breath. Eventually, I let the fire go to embers and crawled into my tent. I didn't zip it all the way. I lay on my back with the knife handle resting across my chest, staring at the fabric overhead. My shoulders were so tense they ached, At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke up hours later with my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might bruise my ribs. I stayed completely still, listening. That's when I heard it. A slow crunch of leaves, one careful step at a time. It was close, maybe 10 feet away, moving around the edge of the bluff. I waited, hoping whatever it was would keep going, but the steps stopped right outside my tent. The air felt like it had thickened somehow, pressing down on me. Then something pressed against the nylon, just one finger tracing the curve of the fabric above my knee. My jaw clenched so tight I felt my teeth ache. The finger moved again, slower, feeling the shape of my leg. I shut my eyes. I didn't breathe. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Finally, the pressure lifted. I heard the steps again, moving away, deliberate, careful, until the sound faded into the trees. I didn't move until the first gray light slid over the ridge. When I finally crawled out, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the knife. There were no tracks, no broken branches, nothing that showed anyone had been there. I tore the camp down in minutes. My pack was a mess, but I didn't care. I just needed to be moving. I didn't stop to eat or drink. I just walked, my head down, the strap digging into the same spot on my shoulder until I felt like it might cut through skin. Every step made my jaw clench tighter. When I finally reached the trailhead, I could see my truck through the trees. Relief hit me so fast my knees almost buckled. I stumbled into the clearing and stopped. Something was propped against the driver's side door. It was a strip of pale bark, curled up at the edges. Someone had carved a shape into it. Long legs, an oval head, no arms, just that blank silhouette. I didn't pick it up. I left it there. I got in my car and I didn't look back. I haven't been back to Jasper Bend since that day. That piece of bark is probably still there, leaning against the memory of my truck door. A quiet reminder that some places are best left alone, and some things are out there in the dark, just waiting to see who's brave enough to break their silence. My name is Marcus. I've been a hunter my whole life. It's in my blood. My father was a hunter and his father before him. For us, it wasn't just a sport. It was an art form, a deep, quiet dialogue with nature. I've hunted every ridge and hollow in the Appalachian range, but there was one place I'd only ever heard about in whispers. A spot the old-timers called the Still Hollow. According to the stories, it was a valley hidden deep on the border of Tennessee and North Carolina. Its defining feature was its complete and utter silence. No birds sang, no squirrels chattered, not even the wind made a sound as it passed through the trees. They said the place was so quiet you could hear your own blood pumping in your ears. Most hunters stayed away, calling it unnatural. But to me, it sounded like a challenge. A place with no background noise where the faintest snap of a twig under a buck's hoof would sound like a thunderclap. It was a hunter's paradise. After months of research and studying old topographical maps, I believed I'd found it. I packed my gear, my trusty .30-06 rifle, a week's worth of rations, and my best camping equipment, and left civilization behind. The last few miles were on foot. As I descended into the valley I was sure was the one, the first thing I noticed was indeed the silence. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was deeper than that. It was a thick, heavy silence, like a blanket smothering the entire valley. Even the crunch of leaves under my boots sounded muffled and dead. I stopped and listened, but there was nothing to listen to. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the low thrum of my own pulse in my ears. "Wow," I whispered, and my own voice sounded strange and out of place in the void. I set up camp in a perfect spot near a small creek. The water flowed without a sound, making no noise as it slipped over the smooth stones. I pitched my tent and gathered wood for a fire. As I lit it, I noticed another oddity. The flames danced bright and warm, but there was no sound of crackling wood, no pop or hiss, just a silent, ghostly light. At the time, I chalked it up to the valley's unique acoustics. I heated my meal and ate, enjoying the absolute peace. This truly was a hunter's dream. The next morning, I set out. I moved through the woods for hours, silent as a wraith. Finally, I saw him, a magnificent 12-point buck grazing in a clearing. He was a majestic animal. My heart began to pound. I slowly raised my rifle, settled it against my shoulder, and looked through the scope. I had him dead in my sights. I held my breath and squeezed the trigger. Click. A soft metallic click, but no explosion, no recoil. I lowered the rifle, confused. Had it jammed? I worked the bolt. A perfectly good cartridge ejected. There was nothing wrong with the rifle. I aimed again, my finger on the trigger, and squeezed. Click. The same dead metallic sound. The buck, which had been oblivious, raised its head and looked directly at me. There was no fear in its eyes, just a calm, knowing gaze. Then it turned and vanished silently into the woods. I stood there, completely stunned. My rifle had never failed me. I pointed it into the air and pulled the trigger again. Click. A cold dread began to pool in my stomach. This wasn't a problem with the rifle, it was a problem with the place. I hurried back to my camp. The sun was setting and the silence of the valley no longer felt peaceful. It felt ominous, oppressive. I stoked the fire, watching its silent flames. I pulled an emergency whistle from my pack and blew into it with all my might. No sound came out, just a soft puff of air from my lips. Now I was truly terrified. I tried to scream, to yell for help, but only a choked, soundless gasp escaped my throat. I had lost my voice. No, that wasn't right. My voice had been taken. I scrambled into my tent and lay awake all night, watching every shadow cast by the fire. I realized I was in a trap. This valley wasn't a hunter's paradise, it was a prison. As soon as dawn broke, I started packing. I had to get out. I took down my tent, rolled my sleeping bag, and threw my pack on my back. I was about to leave when I saw it. At the edge of my camp, in the shadows of the trees, a figure stood. It was tall and thin, so thin it was almost unreal. It had no discernible color. It was a shifting thing of shadow and mist, vaguely humanoid in shape. It had no face, no eyes, but I could feel it watching me. It stood perfectly still, like a statue carved from twilight. I froze in place. My mind was screaming, but no sound would come out. The figure moved forward. It made no sound as it stepped. It seemed to float over the ground. It came to my fire pit where the embers were still glowing. It reached down a long, misty arm and touched the coals. The moment it touched them, they went out. No smoke, no hiss of steam, just instant total extinguishment. Then it turned and looked at me. I knew what it was. It was the guardian of this place, the guardian of the silence. It nullified anything that dared to break its peace. The sound of my rifle, the blast of my whistle, my own scream. It had consumed them all. And now, it had come for me. The thud of my heartbeat, the rush of my breath, the quiet sounds of my own life. I turned and ran. I have never run so fast in my life. I dropped my heavy pack and just ran blindly back the way I came. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my lungs burning, my heart hammering against my ribs. I don't know how long I ran. Finally, I scrambled out of the valley and up the ridge I had entered from. The moment I crossed the threshold of the hollow, the world exploded with sound. The chirping of birds, the rustle of the wind, the sound of my own ragged gasps. It all came rushing back at once. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I fell to my knees, sobbing, bathing in the noise. I looked back at the valley. It lay there, silent and serene, as if nothing had happened. But I saw for just a second a tall, dark figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching me, before it receded back into the woods. I haven't been hunting since that day. I sold my rifle, gave away my gear. I can't stand the quiet of the woods anymore. To me, silence isn't peace. It's a threat, a void that can swallow you at any moment. Sometimes when I'm alone at night and the house is perfectly still, I get that feeling again. That heavy, oppressive silence. And I feel a tall, dark figure standing in the corner of my room waiting. And I hold my breath, hoping my heartbeat isn't loud enough for it to hear.